This is a short video about revision for fundamentals of computer organisation and architecture. And just an introduction, this part. The specification says that you've got to have an understanding and knowledge of the basic internal components of the computer system. So what we mean there are these sections here. We mean these bits here. Okay, so we've got the processor, main memory, address bus, data bus, control bus, and our input and output controllers. Now what do we mean by that? So you should all be familiar with the three parts. Let's clear that out of the way. Okay, the three parts. So you should be familiar with the processor, the memory, and something called the input and output controller. Okay, so the processor, that's the chip, so we would normally see the chip. Memory are memory chips as well. Input and output controllers will be some sort of circuitry. So what we mean by input and output are the things that we plug into the computer. So we need to get data in from a keyboard, for example, and things where we need to get data out. So we need to get data out onto a monitor. So we have to have something that controls those devices because they're not actually part of the computer system. So the processor we often think of as the brains of the computer. The memory is where we store things, and then the input and output controller controls what comes in and what goes out from our computer system. So these are the basic internal components, and that's what we're trying to think of. Okay, so basic internal components, and they are these three. And we often talk about something called a three-box model, with the processor, memory, and the input and output controller. Any computer system you can boil down to this. Now, obviously, these three things need to communicate. So part of the specification says that you've got to understand the need for and the means of communication between these components. So how do they communicate? So we use buses to communicate. So the first bus we need to consider is called the control bus. Now the processor has to, this processor here has to communicate with the other components, and there have to be signals coming back from those components to the processor to know that things are done. So if I want to get something from memory, I would need to send a control signal to memory, and then it will need to send me something back, but I need to know when that operation is finished. Likewise with the input and output controller. So that's the first bus. So data must travel along that bus. There's control instructions. The second bus is the data bus. Now obviously, again, the processor needs to be able to receive data from memory. So we're going to get instructions from memory into the processor here. Okay, we need to get instructions and data from memory into the processor. Likewise, we need to get data from devices. They might come directly into the processor without having to be stored in memory. And we also might need to take stuff out, signals out and data out, to go to the input and output controllers. So data has to travel along those paths. So we've got the control bus, and we've got the control bus, and we've got the data bus. Now just notice the arrows. Okay, they are two-way arrows on the control bus, two-way arrows on the data bus. Now the other bus we have is the address bus. Now notice the arrows. The arrows are not two-way here. So on the address bus we send data from the processor. For example, we need to send data from the processor to memory in order to get things from memory. Okay, so we send an address. Where are we getting that message from, the data from? The data will then be sent back on the data bus, not the address bus. Likewise, we need to do the same with the input and output devices. They might be attached to what we will address them. Okay, so we will use addresses for some of these things, so it's a direct map to in effect a memory location. Okay, but that will be mapped out to a device that will provide input and output. Okay, so if we put all the three together, this is what we have, and then you should notice this is a common diagram that you see. So we've got the three buses, we've got the control bus here, oops, wrong way around, clear that, we've got the control bus here, we've got the data bus here, and we've got the address bus here. Just notice the directions of the arrows, okay, and that's the important thing that you've got to remember about this.